Good evening, everyone, and welcome to my Twitch stream. My name is Astrology, and first things first, I would like to wish everyone a very happy Pride Month. This month, I'm going to be featuring all kinds of LGBTQ plus folks on my stream. Tonight's is someone that I can't think of anybody who doesn't know him, and that is RuPaul. Before we start, apparently RuPaul's preferred pronouns are he, him, but he had a very interesting quote when asked about what his pronouns are. His famous quip was, "You can call me he, you can call me she, you can call me Regis and Kathy Lee, I don't care, just as long as you call me," which makes total sense for someone like him, always wanting to make a splash, and certainly with that quote he did. So we have a lot to talk about tonight, and I am hoping to bring some light to the chart of this amazing individual. So we are going to get started, and of course, if you have questions for me or you want to join the chat, jump right in. I'm happy to take questions, but let's get started. Okay, so first thing we're going to look at is the rising sign. So let's close in. And as you can see, we have a Gemini rising chart. Okay. Looking through the world like a Gemini is a very interesting thing indeed, because as we know, Gemini is the twins. Some people joke that you never know which twin you're going to get when you show up. Well, with Gemini, this is someone who looks at the world through communication. They look through the world and see connections with people. They look at the world and see information. They see gossip. They see self-expression. Someone with a Gemini rising is going to be likely quite talkative. Someone who is going to make sure that their opinion is heard. Now, speaking of that, let's address one thing right away. I found it in my research that RuPaul actually made some anti-trans comments back in 2018. Thankfully, he recanted those comments and apologized after what was a righteously and correctly huge backlash. And then eventually he changed his famous show, RuPaul's Drag Race, to include trans folks. So while his remarks were definitely not well received, and they shouldn't have been, he has made amends for it. I will also say that when you've got someone who's a Gemini rising, they're going to say things that may be a little bit controversial, but they don't always engage the brain before they speak. Gemini is a sign that rules the brain, but this is Gemini rising, not Gemini sun. And so RuPaul made these comments, and like I said, he's walked them back. So thankfully that happened. What is really interesting about this particular rising sign, folks, is two main things. The first one is the degree. So as you notice, RuPaul's rising sign is 29 degrees of Gemini. That is less than 1 degree before 0 Cancer. Now, as we've discussed on this channel a few times, any planet that is between about 29 of a mutable sign like Gemini and 0 and then is between 1 Cancer, anywhere in that area, those are considered planets at the Aries point. In this particular case, it's not a planet, but it is the rising sign, which a lot of astrologers believe represents the physical body. And when you have something at an Aries point, you are going to be noticed for it. And what I find so interesting is that RuPaul is noticed for his body, for the way he works with his body. His body is pretty much his brand. But the fact that it's at 29 Gemini makes it all the easier for him to be noticed. That's a really interesting part of this chart. A small thing, but it's important. If we go across the way, We also see that on the descendant, that 7th house cusp, it is also at 29 degrees of immutable sign. In this case, it's 29 degrees of Sagittarius. So once again, we've highlighted this person who has the potential to be quite famous, and he is. Again, small brushstroke, but important. One of the other most interesting things about this chart, and the chart, we often in astrology say that a lot of people speak, and when they speak their charts. And, excuse me, sometimes you see charts that so perfectly fit a person, and RuPaul definitely falls into that category. So let's talk about the ruling planet of the chart, which is Mercury. Okay, we have Mercury in Scorpio. Mercury in Scorpio is thoughtful, investigative, deep, penetrating, someone who doesn't give up on a search for information. This is a person that when they speak, people listen. I have Mercury in Scorpio as well. I certainly don't have the clout that RuPaul does, but when people with Mercury in Scorpio decide to speak, people pay attention because they've thought about it usually a whole lot before they open up their mouths. What makes this even more interesting is what's next door to it, which is Neptune. So, while strictly speaking, Mercury in Scorpio is the ruling planet of the chart, it sits less than 2 degrees away from Neptune. We've had a lot of conversations about Neptune, folks. Good evening, Ranger Jody. Nice to have you on. Welcome. Neptune, as we've talked about before, is the planet of artists, creatives, dancers, musicians. People who go toward creative pursuits often have a very strong Neptune. RuPaul definitely fits this category because his Neptune is right next to Mercury, the planet of self-expression. And so this chart already is speaking to us, saying this is a person who's going to express themselves in a powerful way and in a powerful artistic way because Neptune is right next door. Again, notice the degrees, right? 8 degrees Scorpio and 9 degrees Scorpio. The fact that the two of them are together in this chart is just a beautiful thing. And it shows RuPaul's ability to speak powerfully and use that in the context of performance. Speaking of performance, let's look at the house where we are. So we are in the 5th house. The 5th house, folks, as I've said before, all the houses have a lot of different keywords and places that they're associated with. The 5th house is associated with children. The 5th house is associated with fun activities. The 5th house is associated with gambling and risks. The 5th house is also associated with anything fun that we do in our lives. And that also includes sex. Our fun sex is had here in the 5th house. Now, to have this setup, these two planets sitting in the 5th house, once again, makes perfect sense. RuPaul is the consummate performer. Again, speaks powerfully, performs powerfully, and with that Neptune there, we have someone who expresses that sensitivity exceptionally well. Please remember, Neptune's about sensitivity. And the other interesting part of Neptune that we can talk about here is that Neptune, as you may or may not know, deals with costumes as well as role play. Both of those are Neptune concepts. Hi, One True Cripple. Welcome aboard, sir. Glad to have you. And so to have Neptune in the 5th house already is very, very supportive of an artistic, creative, musical career that could involve costumes and role play. And so we definitely see that aspect of his personality here in the fifth house. And of course, the ruling planet has got to be right next to it, folks. I mean, when I saw this chart for the first time, I knew it was going to make a great stream because just the ruling planet already tells us so much about who RuPaul is as a person. So yeah, so we have the ruling planet as Mercury, but really in this chart, I'm going to be reading Mercury and Neptune together because they are so close. They are very, they're less than 2 degrees apart, which to me says they're very much blended in this chart. That's one of the other ideas when we have a conjunction, ladies and gentlemen, is that the two planets blend their energies together. And again, because it's the ruling planet, it makes it even more powerful in the chart as a whole. So, we've talked about Gemini rising, we've talked about Mercury and the Neptune conjunction with Mercury, but we haven't talked about the Sun and Moon yet. So let's move over and do that. Now, in my last stream, we had Katy Perry, who is a triple Scorpio. I swear we do not feature all Scorpios on this channel, but it just so happens that RuPaul is a double Scorpio. So I will highlight his Scorpio Sun here at 25 Scorpio. Scorpio people are very intense. That's one of the best words, as I've said before, to describe us. We're pretty much either 0 or 150%. And when you're in the sixth house, when you're dealing with the sixth house, you're dealing with responsibility. You're dealing with day-to-day work. But this is also a house of service. And I believe that RuPaul does a lot of work that I would consider to be service to others. I mean, I think about how many people he has inspired to be who they truly are, simply because of how he acts and the example that he's set. So I definitely look at that as a service mindset. But honestly, the sixth house is not a great place for the Sun overall. It is not particularly attention-getting on its own. It's really not. It's kind of buried there in the sixth. So the Sun placement really is honestly not the greatest. And Scorpio Sun is not exceptionally powerful. It's not debilitated. It's kind of middle of the road. Okay. And yes, I know one true cripple, 0 to 150%. You must be shocked, right? Let me tell you about my train collection. Okay, maybe we'll do that on another stream. We don't need to hear that tonight. But yes, if you get a Scorpio person talking about what they're passionate about, I hope you're in for a very, very long evening. Because if they do, they're going to talk your ear off. Okay, so when we're talking about the Sun, we have the Sun in the sixth. Again, not a great spot, but a spot that does highlight the idea of service. What's also interesting is that the sixth house deals with our everyday health and also the connection between body and mind. And this is another area where I believe he excels. He really does help people to understand the mindset that they need to have going through life. I find that oftentimes his words really exemplify that. So again, while it's not a particularly easy position or a wonderful position for fame, his ascendant descendant angles on the cardinal on the Aries points more than make up for that. Now, as if one Scorpio luminary wasn't enough, we have two. RuPaul is a double Scorpio. Scorpio moon is one of the more challenging moon placements because it is very, very intense. And it can make relationships very difficult as a whole, especially relationships that are purely focused on physical intimacy. because physical intimacy, sex for Scorpios can be like a drug. And so for those of us born under the sign of Scorpio, we always have to be very aware that our relationships do not become one-dimensional. But especially with having Scorpio sun and moon, there's absolutely that tendency toward jealousy, envy, possessiveness. And I call Scorpio moon the class 5 rapids, because the emotional rise and fall of someone with a Scorpio moon is very broad. Okay, someone can be super, super happy and then super depressed the next day, and even more quickly than that. So we always want to watch our Scorpio moon friends and make sure that they are taking care of their emotional health. And I certainly hope that RuPaul does that. That's important. And again, it's here in this 5th house, and it is right next to, well, not too close, but close enough to be considered a conjunction with that Neptune and with Mercury, the ruling planet. So, what does that give us, folks? Well, we have 3 planets that are within 6 degrees of one another. And in astrology, we call that a stellium, a true stellium. A stellium is a set of 3 planets that are within 7 degrees of each other, and they all act together. Again, they're all blended as one. So in addition to having Mercury, Neptune, we also have the moon in there. Now, what makes the moon great here, even though the moon in Scorpio is debilitated and doesn't always work particularly well, it is very powerful in the sense that it's in the 5th house of performance. So once again, where do we see RuPaul at his most passionate? And the moon is also where we're comfortable, because the moon represents our emotional security. So where is he most comfortable? He's most comfortable in costume. He's most comfortable playing a role. He's most comfortable in situations where he is being a creative performer. Makes perfect sense in this case. Absolutely. But this is probably the most powerful set of planets in this chart by far. It would be without the ruling planet, folks. But with the ruling planet in there, it kicks up the energy of the whole thing even more. Now, I want to go in a little bit of a different direction tonight, because we have the 5th house here, and the 5th house does represent children, and we have the moon placement sitting here in the 5th house. We know that RuPaul had a very challenging upbringing. We do know that he was raised Catholic. We also know that he was raised in a home where his father was basically absent, and his mother was very volatile. Apparently his mother got so angry with his father at one point that she poured gasoline all over his father's car and tried to torch it. And so that was, of course, very challenging for RuPaul as a child. And when you have the moon in Scorpio, there is a tendency to have very intense relationships with the maternal unit, if you will. And those relationships are not necessarily bad, right? They're just intense. So I want to be clear about that. When you're dealing with a Scorpio moon, mom is likely going to have a very intense impact on you, good or bad, or sometimes, in the case of a couple of clients I know, it's actually both. Now, let's talk about aggravating factors for that. So normally I would have said, okay, Scorpio moon, yeah, difficulty with mom, okay, that's pretty standard cookbook stuff. And folks, when I say a cookbook, in the astrology world, there are plenty of books and online sites where if you look up moon in Scorpio, it'll give you a whole bunch of just kind of standard characteristics that we might or might not see in a person's chart. We call that in the astrological world a cookbook. And so if you open up your online or physical astrology cookbook, you're going to see a lot of things about Scorpio moon and the intense relationship with mom. But I want to show you something else in this chart that really highlights it for me. I'm going to move over here just a little bit. And we're going to look at the fourth house. Now, as I've mentioned in the past, the fourth house in astrology represents mom. Okay, this house, the fourth house represents our mom, represents our home, it represents our private life. This is the life that not everyone gets to see, folks. Okay, only people who live with you get to see that. And so the fourth house traditionally represents mom. As I've said before, some astrologers will say it's mom and dad. Some will say it's the dominant parent or the less dominant parent. But in this case, I'm absolutely certain this is mom here. Now, if I look at the degree here, the degree is 8 Virgo. That's where Pluto is. Okay, he's part of the Pluto in Virgo generation. As you know, Pluto has goes between 13 and 19 years between sign changes, which is quite a bit. So he's part of the Pluto in Virgo generation, being born in 1960. Well, if you look at the degree of Pluto, and it's at 8 degrees, and you look at the degree of the cusp, which is 11 Virgo, this is within 5 degrees, and we have a 5-degree rule in astrology about planets that are close to what we call angular houses. So this Pluto in Virgo is absolutely within range of having a powerful impact, because look at this. This line, remember, represents home, mother, family. And Pluto is right there on the cusp. What makes this even more of an impact in this case is that, as I said, we have Pluto in Virgo because he's part of that generation, right? You probably know where I'm going already, but let me take the mystery out of it. What's the ruling planet for Virgo? Well, you look at that. It's that Mercury. And so that Mercury has an impact because it rules the planet on the cusp of the fourth house. Virgo is not an easy planet to deal with. And hopefully my wife can't hear me say that too much in the next room. Virgo is a sign that can be very difficult to work with, and I'll explain why. It's because Virgo has a sense of discrimination and taste, and they know what the right way to do things is. There's a right way, there's a wrong way, and there's a Virgo way, is what I like to say. And I truly believe, since my wife's probably listening to this, that everyone should have a Virgo in their lives, and they should allow that Virgo to help organize them. And yes, One True Cripple, you're right. My wife does have absolutely excellent taste, and she is the most incredible book editor on the planet, among many other things. However, because Virgo does have a perfectionist streak, to have this on the fourth house cusp probably means that his mom, RuPaul's mom, did not put up with a lot of nonsense. And Pluto, on the very edge, adds to the volatility. So when I read that RuPaul's mom was volatile, and I saw the moon in Scorpio, I thought, okay, that's probably true. But then I saw Pluto on the cusp of the fourth house, and I thought, oh yeah. The potential for power and volatility is ratcheted up even more when you put Pluto in the position that it's in. And then to have the ruling planet support it, folks, that's a lot of power. Even though when you look at the chart at first, it doesn't really look like it. You see Sun in the 6th house, even in Scorpio, you're like, his parents don't look particularly powerful. Mom definitely was. That's for sure. And RuPaul did not finish his entire upbringing with his mom. He actually left with one of his sisters and moved away from Southern California. While we're here, let's look at Dad. So we're going to look up at the 10th house. And interestingly enough, we have Pisces on the cusp of the 10th. Okay. Remember that the 10th house represents our father, but it also represents our public life, okay? And first of all, we have an empty 10th house. We call it untenanted. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that dad was going to be absent, but I am going to highlight the sign of Pisces on the cusp of the 10th house. Pisces is a sign that has a lot of challenges, generally with consistency. Pisces people, I love you to death, but I don't want to count on you to be places on time or finish things under a deadline. I just don't. Because when you're talking about the fish, remember, there are always two fish. One that can rise to the challenge and one that can swim away. And similar to Gemini, it is a double-bodied sign. So dad was absent most of the time. To see Pisces on the cusp doesn't surprise me in the least. But I'm going to show you something else that's not going to surprise you either. For those of you who know, think about what the ruling planet of Pisces is. Will you look at that? It's Neptune. I told you that stellium was going to be powerful, folks. I did. And I meant it. You have both of the parental houses being ruled by planets that are part of this damn stellium. I mean, this really fits. This really fits him. And I know I sound surprised, and I really shouldn't, because this astrology stuff actually does work. I know, crazy, right? It's been 36 years, and I'm just figuring that out. No, but I want you to see that it works. All you got to do is dig a little bit deeper, and you'll see it. Okay? I somehow, when I draw these things out, I feel like that internet meme where the guy has all of the different pieces of paper linked up with string, and he kind of looks like a crazy person. Yeah, when I do these streams, I kind of feel like that, folks. But hey, that's what you come in for, so that's what I'm here for. I'm here for it. Anyway, I hear my cat at the door. Hold on one second. Last time I did not let her in, and she was very upset. Hold on. Come on, Pelly. Come on. All right, Neater. Thanks for holding, folks. Now my cat is inside, and undoubtedly in 5 minutes, she'll want to go out again. Anyway, but I wanted to make that detour to show you the parental charts here, because they are part of that stellium. All of the planets in that stellium are very important in this chart. Okay, now I hope you can see that. All right, so let's see what's next. So as we continue on, we've hit a number of the planets so far, but you're also going to notice that you may notice that we have another stellium in this chart. I'm going to point it out. Here it is. We have 3 Capricorn planets in the chart, all of them in the 7th house. Now, I know for those of you who are really nerdy, and thankfully you're all very nerdy, and I love that about you. You've looked at the degrees and you've said, John, come on, man. You just told us that if it's in a stellium, it's got to be within 7 degrees. All the planets got to be within 7 degrees. And I know you've already looked and you've said, wait a minute, Venus is at 3 and Jupiter is at 4, but Saturn's at 14. Yes, one true cripple, lies and slander. None of us are nerdy at all. Not at all. Not even me. Let me tell you about my trains. Anyway, what you're going to find, folks, is that in this particular case, Jupiter and Venus meet the criteria for being a conjunction. They're within 7 degrees, right? About a degree in this case. But Saturn really doesn't fit that. So how is this a stellium? This is called a sign stellium. Okay? It means we have 3 or more planets that are in the same sign, but they are not all conjunct. They're not all within 7 degrees, which would make it a true stellium. Because RuPaul is not going to just be your average ordinary chart, folks. You should have known that when you joined the stream. It is 2 stelliums. 1 sign stellium in Capricorn and 1 true stellium here in Scorpio. But there are 2. Now, let's talk about the other stellium. All right, so we have here in the 7th house of relationships, as I said, we have the fame here in the descendant, with the descendant at 29 Sagittarius. And when I see Sagittarius on the cusp of the 7th house, it can indicate that someone needs a lot of freedom in relationships, which, I mean, RuPaul, given everything that he's been through and everything that he is, I absolutely would expect that. Would absolutely expect that. But the planets that are in here are in Capricorn. Capricorn people, do not send me nasty emails for calling you out. Capricorn is a very boring sign. And I say that knowing that I am a Capricorn moon and rising person. Okay? Capricorn is boring because they're reliable, they're responsible, they're honorable, they show up. They do the things that you need them to do. And if they can't do it, they'll honestly tell you they can't, which is very rare in the zodiac world, and certainly not Sagittarian traits. Okay? Sagittarians, you are amazing, amazing people for so many reasons, but reliability is not always your strong suit. Yes, absolutely, one true cripple. You are amazing, amazing people indeed. Once again, however, I like to give my Sagittarian friends the freedom to do things the way they want to do, whereas Capricorn people are much more comfortable with a protocol. They want to know how exactly do you want it done, and they'll follow it, because that's the responsibility piece. Your Sagittarian folks are much more freed spirits. I know, I have rude things to say about all the signs, one true cripple. Sorry about that, but that's just kind of how this business is. In any case, when I see Venus in Capricorn, this is someone who is interested in long-term, stable, solid partnerships, and someone who also is interested in long-term financial growth and gain as well. Okay? And so as you're looking at this chart, we're seeing a lot of facets of RuPaul that maybe we didn't expect. And this is one of those. He wants partners for long periods of time who are responsible and who show up. That reliability, that responsibility, that duty, that feeling of duty is very much a part of the Capricorn mythos right there. Now, once again, right next door, we also have another planet, which is Jupiter. Okay. As a quick aside, when we see Jupiter and Venus together, remember that Venus is the planet of sugars. It's the planet of sweetness. So I would not be surprised at all if RuPaul had to watch what he eats, because this is one of those medical astrology ideas that can often come up and show up as diabetes in a chart. Because we love Jupiter, but he likes to make everything bigger. And so he's going to make the desire for sugar and potentially sugars in the body bigger. So that's an aside, but that's one thing in a chart. If you see Jupiter and Venus together, there's the potential for diabetes. Of course, my cat has decided she wants to go out, so stand right there. Come on, Pally. Let's go. Come on, Nader. Come on. And true to form, my Aries cat can't sit still for more than 5 minutes. Astrology's cool, isn't it? Anyway, as we look at this part of the chart, this is a very different side of RuPaul than perhaps we expected to see. Jupiter in Capricorn can be very challenging because Jupiter wants to expand and Capricorn says, whoa, whoa, we have to be really responsible as we expand. We have to do it slowly. We have to do it cautiously. Jupiter, I love you, but slowly and cautiously is not your thing. Jupiter is, I want all of it. I'd like it now, please, and I'd like it covered in chocolate. And considering that Jupiter is conjunct Venus, in this particular case, that's probably about what Jupiter's saying. Okay? But again, we have in the 7th house, Jupiter in Capricorn. So Jupiter in Capricorn in the 7th wants the slow growth in relationships, but wants someone who believes what excuse me for a moment, wants to believe that we, sorry about that, folks. Had something technical happen on this end. Jupiter wants to share the same beliefs as everybody else. And so for RuPaul to have a partner, that partner needs to be someone who's interested in long-term, cautious, careful growth in the same direction. That's really what this chart is saying about RuPaul and relationships. At the same time, wanting that Sagittarius freedom to do what they want, in the sense of they don't want to be tied down. The motto of Sagittarius, as I like to say, is "Don't fence me in." That's kind of like the unofficial Sagittarius motto for me. And so, as we look at this chart, we see a very interesting and intricate way of looking at relationships that, again, because RuPaul is who he is, it probably was very challenging, especially once he became very famous, to have relationships that match this. But we see it here very clearly. Now, as we move up in the chart, a little further on in the 7th house, we also see Saturn in Capricorn here. Saturn in Capricorn is Saturn in its most powerful position, folks. But Saturn in Capricorn can cause depression because he is very responsible and very service-oriented and very reliable. He's the type of person that you would want doing your taxes, being there when you really need them, someone you can always count on, someone who's a rock. Saturn in Capricorn does that, but they tend to be so serious about what they do, and they take so much responsibility on their shoulders that it can weigh them down. And so in relationships, likely RuPaul is an extremely faithful person who wants to and believes that he should take care of any partners that he has. And again, that can be a tremendous amount of responsibility. Now, one other interesting note I'll throw out there is, as I said a moment ago, we do have Jupiter in Capricorn, and we have Saturn in Capricorn. RuPaul was born in 1960. Now, I gotta admit, I'm a huge fan of The Dark Crystal. That's one of my favorite movies ever. And in The Dark Crystal, they talk about the Great Conjunction. Okay? And I see Agra going, what's the Great Conjunction? I just love that movie. Anyway, I mention it because when Jupiter and Saturn are conjunct in a chart, folks, that only happens once every 20 years. So this person, RuPaul, was born at a very propitious time because Jupiter was going to be making a conjunction to Saturn not too long after his birth. Every 20 years we have a great conjunction, and lots of really important, powerful things happen during a great conjunction. And so RuPaul was born right on the edge of that very interesting time. Again, just another little nugget, but certainly interesting. All right. So let's see what else we can talk about in here. Plenty. Okay, one of the planets that we haven't talked about yet is Mars, so I'm going to highlight him. And when we're talking about gender in astrology, okay, traditionally speaking, we have Venus that represents the divine feminine, the feminine principle. It represents women, okay, and how we feel about women. And we have Mars, which represents the male principle. Okay? Men as a whole represents physical activity, represents sexuality. All of those things are part of the Mars archetype. Remember, Venus sits there on the couch and her job is to tell us what we want. Mars is the guy who goes to get it. Now, what is fascinating here is that Mars is in a very difficult sign to work with. Mars is in Cancer here. Mars in Cancer is actually extremely protective and maternal. Mars is in fall in this chart. A planet in fall struggles, and it is hard sometimes for people to use a planet that's in fall. They're not comfortable using that planet. Many times they can avoid it, okay? And Mars is the planet of physical everything, the physical body. And what I find so interesting about this chart is that we have Venus in Capricorn, that long-term, responsible, and almost fatherly influence over Venus, over the female principle. And over here with Mars, we have a very protective, maternal, even somewhat passive Mars. Absolutely fascinating that those two roles in some ways are almost flipped in this chart. Again, the chart speaks for the person. I always say the chart is where you start, but when I saw this, I thought this is right in line for what we would expect from RuPaul. Absolutely what we would expect. Now, the challenging part is that it's in the first house. Now, we haven't talked a lot about the first house, but the first house represents our self, our ego, our overall self-expression. It's how we want the world to see us. The ascendant is at that, okay? Well, this Mars is in fall and it's in the first house, but it's very close to the edge of the second. So it's not close enough to the ascendant to impact the ascendant. If it were, we'd be having a different conversation, but it's not. And so as you look at this chart, keep in mind that in a lot of ways, Venus and Mars, their traditional roles, I should say, are kind of flipped here. Saturn is the ruling planet of Capricorn. Saturn represents the father archetype. And then we've got the moon, which also represents mother as an archetype as well. And we have the moon in a feminine sign, Scorpio. Then we have another male or father signature in the chart, which is the sun sitting in the 6th house. Again, kind of buried there. Not a very powerful placement for it, although the sun in Scorpio is kick-ass, I will tell you that. It definitely is. But it's not placed particularly well in the chart. Okay, it's kind of buried. Again, nothing wrong with it. but it doesn't, it's not a great place for the sun to do its job. Remember that the sun's job is to shine. That's his job. Okay? Now, speaking of the sun, we have in this chart a very interesting connection that I want to highlight here. And that is for a planet that we haven't talked about yet, which is Uranus. So let's quickly erase some of this. Now, Uranus is the planet of the LGBTQ movement. It is also the planet of kink. It is also the planet of the unconventional. It's the planet of being progressive. It's the planet of the cutting edge. Uranus doesn't want what's old. Uranus wants what's new. Okay? Uranus doesn't want normal. Uranus wants different. Uranus wants unique. Okay? Uranus is the planet that in Pride Month we're looking at going, okay, this is your time to shine. Okay? In this chart, take a look. We have the sun, and when you look at that, we have almost an exact 90-degree angle, folks, between the sun and Uranus. And I'm going to show you how exact it is. The sun is at 25 degrees 46 minutes. Uranus is at 25 degrees of Leo 44 minutes. It is 89 degrees and 58 minutes off. You almost never see connections in an astrological chart that are that close, folks. Almost never. The closer the angle, the more powerful the effect. And if you know anything about Uranus, you shouldn't be surprised that this is in RuPaul's chart. Okay? This is someone who has become the unconventional. He is the unconventional. He was unconventional before many, many other people were unconventional. Remember also that the term unconventional is mostly determined by what society thinks of as normal, correct, acceptable, right? What is unconventional in 1920 is not what's unconventional in 1950, which is not unconventional in 1980. Like, all those things have changed. But this is 1960, folks, and we have a man born at that time who has such a strong connection to Uranus. He was going to stick out. Now, would I go so far as to say the Sun-Uranus tight square that we have would have indicated homosexuality? I might have suspected it, because that's such a strong connection. But remember that Uranus also represents trans folks, non-binary folks, and also the idea of unconventional relationships. This is ethical non-monogamy, this is polyamory, this is swinging, this is thruples, this is all of those, what we would consider today, unconventional relationships. And so when I see the sun and Uranus together like this, that close, you know that this is a person that's going to stick out. And they're going to stick out, folks, in all the best ways. They are going to challenge the status quo. They are not going to care what other people think. They are going to push forward and be different, and everyone is going to see it. Remember that the sun is who we're trying to become. And he has Uranus basically saying, I am here for you. You are going to shine in an unconventional, amazing, fabulous way in this lifetime, and I am going to help you do it. That's the part that you really need to think about. Also, we have the third house is where Uranus is. The third house, again, is not a great position for something to be in, But earlier we talked about his controversial statements, right? Well, Uranus is the planet of the shit starter. Okay? Uranus knows how to start things up. Uranus is the one who's going to throw the wrench into the works just because they want to see what happens. And we have such a strong Sun-Uranus connection in this chart that that kind of situation would have found RuPaul one way or another. Now, I will also say that RuPaul probably at one point had difficulty staying still for more than 5 minutes, because people who have that Sun-Uranus connection are not going to want to do jobs that are conventional. They're not going to sit in an office. This is not an office dweller. This is someone who wants to be out there making a difference in the world, doing humanitarian activities, out putting out leaflets, out protesting. This is the kind of person that we're talking about. Okay. Now, before I forget, there is a great seminar for those of you who are interested in astrology. There is a wonderful presentation by a guy named Chris Renstrom, who's one of my personal favorite astrologers, and he did a seminar called Does Uranus Make Me Gay? And if you go to Astrology University, and I think it's $20 or $15, you can pay for and download that lecture. And I highly recommend it. He goes into the mythology behind Uranus and how it became a symbol for the LGBTQ plus movement around the world. And I've listened to it, and it's honestly amazing. And it's more historical than astrological. And so if you like history and you want to find out some more of the history of this stuff, absolutely, please feel free to pick it up, because I know I did and I was very happy with it. Anyway, this Sun-Uranus connection is incredibly powerful and important for RuPaul. It really, really is. And again, we have it in the third house of day-to-day activities. Okay? Who he is day-to-day is what you see is what you get. In some ways, though, Uranus is also the planet of, well, expect the unexpected. And so, in some ways with RuPaul, you never really know where he's going to turn up. For example, I was in Las Vegas a number of years ago, and I was at the Flamingo where RuPaul's Drag Race was being filmed, and they actually had a RuPaul's Drag Race gift shop, which I thought was completely amazing. Hopefully they still have it. That was a couple years ago. But if you are going to Las Vegas, I highly encourage you, go to the Flamingo, not just because it's one of the oldest hotels left in Las Vegas, but also because they did a great job supporting RuPaul and Drag Race. Anyway. Now, we don't have too much more time, so let's talk about a few more facets of this. Now, we haven't really talked about the elemental balance. I was kind of too excited to get the rest of the stuff. So let's look at the elements real quick while we're here. And once again, not surprising anyone, we have a very interesting elemental makeup. So let's take a look. We have one fire planet. So we have a singleton planet. It's the only fire planet in the chart, and I'm going to highlight it for you. Oh, look what it is. It's Uranus. Could you have guessed that Uranus is the only fire planet in the whole chart? So it has an incredibly close connection to the sun, and it's the only fire energy in the whole chart. There was no way that RuPaul was going to hide his light under a bushel basket, even with the sun here in the 6th. That connection to Uranus changes the whole game, folks. The entire game. I can make the argument that that stellium that we talked about, that Scorpio stellium, is very powerful. And it is. I could say that, but I could also say that this Sun-Uranus connection is also one of the most powerful in the chart. Those two are probably vying for which one is the most important for RuPaul. But let's not lose track of the elements. So let's go back. So we have one fire planet. There's our singleton. Again, a singleton is going to stick out by its very nature. And again, because it's connected to the sun, it's going to come out even more. And wow, look at that. We have a void. Now, I don't mean little black kittens. I adore them too. Not those kinds of voids. But air has no representation in this chart. None. There are no air planets. When you've got a void in an element, it can mean a couple of things. One, it can mean likely you're not particularly objective. And we know RuPaul has a lot of opinions and is not afraid of expressing them, and they're his own, okay? He's not the type of person generally that's going to be convinced that their opinions are incorrect. So there's that. Also, when you have a void in air, it can also indicate that the way that you think, because air is the thinking element, it may mean that you're not as creative thought-wise. You may not be particularly good at creative problem solving. Now we know he's very creative with a lot of other things, right? All that Neptune stuff. Yeah, but when it comes to straight up logic, problem solving, those might not be his strong suits. Now, in addition, when you have a void in an element, you may also find that you are attracted to people who are filled with that element, who have a lot of it. And so my guess would be that he probably has attracted in the past a lot of air in his partners, and of course fire too, but especially air. This is not the type of person who's going to be happy with someone who's dumb. And often when I do tarot readings, when I see it, I'll say, stupid people need not apply, right? And I'm sure he very much feels the same way in his personal life. Like he doesn't want to be surrounded by stupid people. Okay? So he's likely going to be attracted to those people who are very airy, who know how to be more objective, who know how to keep their distance, who know how to think logically and perhaps a little bit more creatively than he does. I could see any of those things as possibilities, folks. The only real air thing that we have in the chart, and I can't really count it as air, folks, because it's not a planet, is the Gemini ascendant. That's really the only air representation we have in the chart. And it's not nothing. It is the rising sign. But when we talk about the elemental balance, folks, we don't look at the angles. We just look at the planets. So it's still considered an air void, even though he does have Gemini rising. Okay. Folks, this is one of those charts that we could talk about for hours. I mean, I guess I say that about all of them. But in this particular case, this chart has a whole lot of different levels and onion layers to peel off. I am happy at the moment to take any questions that you might have about anything we've talked about. Okay, well, hearing none, I would like to take a moment to thank you as always for spending part of your week with me. I am sincerely grateful for that. I am going to be doing another member of the LGBTQ plus community next week and every Tuesday that I have a stream in June. So if you find someone who you think would be worthy of looking at their chart, please let me know and I'm happy to consider them. Otherwise, until I see you again, have a great week.